I recognize the member for Point of Appeal. Kindly proceed.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. Deputy Speaker, just before we broke for tea, I was talking about the SMEs, and I'll get back to that. But I just want to go back to the bill that is in front of us, Clause 2. And as I have the Minister of Finance here. Clause 2, in respect to the Heritage and Stabilisation Fund Act, is amended by inserting after Section 15 the following section. 15A1, notwithstanding Section 15 and any other written law, and subject to subsection 2, withdrawals may be made from the fund where A disaster area is declared under the Disaster Measures Act. When the Minister of Finance was piloting the bill, and he read out that clause, he sort of skirted over that clause A, not giving a sort of explanation to us, the opposition, why was there a need to put in 15A1A, Deputy Speaker, which reads a disaster area declared under the Disaster Measures Act. And I'm trying to understand why there's a need to put in that subsection, given that the HSF fund is such an important fund for this country. And I don't know if it's hypothetically, I asked the Minister of Finance if, let us say, within the Princess Town area, you have the mud volcanoes, who I think last year was very active, and a couple of the homes in that area got damaged, and the families were calling for about relocation. So I don't know, and I would give way to the Minister of Finance if he can add some clarity to 15A1A, under what circumstances that would be. Minister?
All I would say is that all that money spent on gate was wasted. A disaster is a hurricane or an earthquake. So if a 8 on the Richter scale earthquake levels Trinidad and Tobago, it's just as bad as COVID-19. Come on. It's a calamity. If you look in the actual act itself, it refers to the event of a calamity. Okay? Hurricane, earthquake, not mud volcano.
Thank
mud
you.
Volcano.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker, for that clarity. Deputy Speaker, when you look at 15A3, where it states where withdrawal, and this is the bill I'm reading, where withdrawal has been made from the fund under this section, the Minister shall cause a report to be laid in the House of Representatives within a 60-day of withdrawal. My colleague from Caroni Central had mentioned that that is a bit too long, but I also asked if that report is laid, is it going to be laid to go to the PSC, the Public Accounts Committee? I don't know, I asked.
Every document that is laid in the Parliament goes somewhere, okay? And certainly that would go to an appropriate committee. We have so many committees now. That report would certainly go to the Committee on Expenditure. There's a Committee on Public Expenditure.
Thank you again, Minister of Finance. And that leads into the whole aspect of accountability and transparency, that, which is such a critical fund that we feel that the taxpayers need to get some accountability with the change of the use and how you can withdraw funding from this fund, Madam Speaker, Deputy Speaker. Deputy Speaker, I just want to put on the table, we are not happy how this clause is worded, and we would like at the committee stage if some consideration could be done with the report from 60 days be reduced to maybe 30 days so that we can have a quick oversight of what the fund was used for, Deputy Speaker. Deputy Speaker, I want to just say, when I listened to the Prime Minister over the last few days, and he talks about we are all in this together, I really believe that we have to be in this together. as the Attorney General in his debate talked about all sectors, the individuals, the public, companies, unions, government. We are all in this together. I agree with that, Deputy Speaker, because for us to get out of this situation we are in, it takes a concerted effort, whether we all isolate ourselves to protect our families and loved ones. It has to be all together, Deputy Speaker. But be that as it may, there are some sectors of this economy that need some help. I use the word maybe guidance from the government in assisting them to stay afloat. And again, that's the small and medium enterprises, those businesses that employ a large, over 80,000 individuals in this country, Deputy Speaker. And in a crosstalk with the Minister of Finance, he said in his wind-up, he will teach me about the small and medium enterprises. Okay, sorry. Deputy Speaker, I draw the attention to yourself that, and I asked the Minister of Finance to, and he might have done it, look at some of the measures that the UK Prime Minister is putting in place to assist the country, and also the Australian, even the Jamaican, our Jamaican country has put some good measures in place. Not that the measures that the Minister of Finance has announced here this afternoon is not good, but as I said, it needs a lot more in my view, and it has to be bold. I want to also ask the Minister of Finance, the $1,500 that he mentioned as to the workers, especially in the small and medium sector, the 80,000 plus individuals that he talked about at $1,500 in his calculation, about 120 million, Deputy Speaker, for 3 months, that's 360. So he rounded it off to 400 million. The concern that I have of that $1,500, and I know the Minister of Finance said by Monday we would have some clarity how it's going to operate. I ask, given that individuals that receive, that are part of the NIB, NIS plan, at some point in time they will get a pension at age 60. I am asking if this is, because there's a talk out there, I'm not saying it's malicious or anything, but there's a trend of thought that whatever funding the $1,500 that individuals get that is distributed by the NIB, paid by the government, one is saying, or could be as a deferral or upfront payment on their potential pension when they reach age 60. So I just want to put that on the table, and maybe the minister in his wind-up could add some clarity to that. Add some clarity
members,
to that.
Please,
because
members.
That is the information that a lot of workers are asking, Deputy Speaker. Deputy Speaker, as I said, we require some bold initiatives. Look at the rescue packages from the international countries, Deputy Speaker. And I must want to say that one has to remember, Deputy Speaker, that when we were in a crisis, and we are in a crisis right now, back in 2009 with the CLICO, the government stepped up to the plate and put measures in place to bail out CLICO for the good of the country. Now we are in a crisis, Deputy Speaker, and I really would ask the Minister of Finance to really add more to the measures that he's putting in place right now, and it could go a lot more in our view, Deputy Speaker. Deputy Speaker, I want to ask the Minister of Finance to look at ADB, the Agricultural Development Bank, and see how they can assist in respect to our small and medium farmers in either the loan deferrals, even some capital funding to assist them in food security in growing that aspect, Deputy Speaker. Because if you, in this particular crisis that we are in right now as a country, and you're in one type of business, and that business is generating zero revenue, maybe you have to turn to another source of business to generate some sort of income for sustenance and so forth, Deputy Speaker. So food security, the agriculture economy is something that will help this country as far as scarce foreign exchange, Deputy Speaker. Deputy Speaker, again, I ask the Minister of Finance to either use moral suasion with the landlords of this country, the people who own malls, etc., to see how they can work with their tenants in either deferring rental payment, because I understand that the banks have stepped up to the plate. In a particular bank, FCB, and they have now deferred loan payments for 3 months in the first instance, and I'm hoping that landlords who might have loans with commercial banks, and as they get deferral payments, that they can also work with their tenants to assist them in keeping their businesses alive. Because as the member for Caroni Central said, we would get over this, and what happens after we get over this. We wouldn't like to see that when we do get over this crisis that we are in, Deputy Speaker, that we have a set of small and medium businesses that have closed up shop, and you have a lot of foreclosures, etc., Deputy Speaker. Deputy Speaker, there was an article in today's newspapers, I think it's the Express, written by Dr. Terence Farrell, and he talked about the perfect storm. And in that article, he really talked about that HSF issue, and if we do not manage that properly, we could be in a worse position than we are in today, Madam Speaker. So, Deputy Speaker, so I refer that article to the Minister of Finance. I have not heard anything from maxi taxi drivers or even small business who own maxi taxis. There's a transport movement of people down. They have payments to be made. They have their families to feed, and so on, Deputy Speaker. So I really hope that the Minister of Finance. Deputy Speaker, there's something that I'm asking the Minister of Finance to look at. In the World Bank, I know under World Bank, the IMF, a lot of these international funding agencies, for example, the World Bank has put out a $16 million funding under the COVID crisis that the world is under. And I'm asking if the Minister of Finance has tapped in those international funding agencies to see, as a first resort, that they set it up for COVID crisis, that the country can tap into that. The IMF has a fund, the World Bank has a fund.
Elapsed. You have an additional 15K to avail.
Yes.
Kindly proceed.
So, Deputy Speaker, so I just asked, I put that on the table because it is there for the Minister of Finance to tell the country that he is able to access those funding at maybe low or non-existent rates and with a long-term repayment. But Deputy Speaker, as I close, and I didn't think I would take so long, I want to agree with the TTMA, the Trinidad and Tobago Manufacturers Association. And the opposition also agrees with the Trinidad and Tobago Manufacturers Association, where we recognize that this is a difficult time for all, and the issue of survivability is systemic. The challenges we face demands a responsible and intelligent response from those of us charged with governance and those of us who contribute to a viable and stable economy. Deputy Speaker, it is, as the release says, and we agree, the situation can become very protracted. It will put a strain on all our resources in this country and will have serious implications, not for the government and businesses, but more importantly, for our families and our family lives, Deputy Speaker. This country will not be the same given what we are going through. And we hope, and we will get through this, Deputy Speaker. And I want to say thank you, Deputy Speaker, and with the grace of God, we will get through this. Thank you.
Recognize the member for Couva South.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker. As I join this debate on this very important piece of legislation which has been brought by the government of Trinidad and Tobago as it relates to an act to amend the Heritage and Stabilisation Fund, the Government Savings Bond Act, and the Value Added Tax Act, Mr. Deputy Speaker. And immediately, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I want to join my colleagues on both sides of the House in underscoring the importance of what we are confronting in Trinidad and Tobago at this point in time, the realities that we have to deal with, and the sense of duties and responsibilities we must fulfill inside of this Parliament and outside of this Parliament, Mr. Deputy Speaker. And it is important that I place on record, from an opposition point of view, that we all recognize the importance of all categories of workers serving on the front line at this point in time in combating or attempting to combat COVID-19 and to mitigate its impact upon Trinidad and Tobago, whether it is healthcare workers, law enforcement, planned quarantine, doctors, nurses, whatever support staff that is keeping our public health system, our public institutions going, and at the end of the day, keeping Trinidad and Tobago going as a society, Mr. Deputy Speaker. And Mr. Deputy Speaker, it is important to respond to a couple of things that have been raised in this debate, especially from the point of view of the member for San Fernando West, the Attorney General, when he responded to some of the concerns of the opposition and attempted to, I would not say belittle, but in his own style, really attempted to, in his own way really, to minimize the importance of what we were trying to achieve here this evening. And we on this side know for a fact, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that we are in crisis, and this is extraordinary times and extraordinary circumstances. And if this is considered on the part of the government to present a bill in the House, which they have termed to be extraordinary in response to the COVID-19 crisis, extraordinary initiatives from a legislative point of view demands extraordinary responses based on the queries and concerns of the opposition. And I say this against the fact that we all know for a fact that when there is a drawdown from the Heritage and Stabilisation Fund, it will go into the Consolidated Fund. And the Consolidated Fund, the accounts are closed, and there is what we would call, at the end of the financial year, accountability from a line item point of view, and so on. But it is important that if we are withdrawing $10+ billion under extraordinary circumstances, at least the government displays some kind of responsibility here this evening in this House and indicate, whilst we have gotten some indicators of how sums of monies will be spent, I think that we on this side have a responsibility in asking those questions, and we hope that in the winding up of the Minister of Finance that we will get additional information as it relates to the spending of this $10+ billion within the economy of Trinidad and Tobago. Mr. Deputy Speaker, I also heard from the Attorney General, the member for San Fernando West, when he made his intervention. He attempted to call out the opposition and the opposition members as it relates to what the opposition has been doing and what has been our sense of responsibility in this whole COVID-19 crisis. And it is important, Mr. Deputy Speaker, to put the opposition's response on the record of this House, because it must not go undone or it must not go unheard as if the opposition has been irresponsible in its conduct since this COVID-19 virus has come to the attention of the global community, and more so now it has hit home. And I want to say that the leader of the opposition displayed that sense of responsibility when she dispatched a letter to the Honorable Prime Minister calling for bipartisan talks to discuss the crisis. And whilst I will not go into the merits of what was brought before this House from the point of view of urgent public importance and so on, the opposition was first to raise the issue of COVID-19 in this very said House.
I rise on standing order 55-1B. This is the second speaker to go into length on this.
Overruled. Please proceed. I'll give you some leeway, member.
So, Mr. Deputy Speaker, as I continue my response, as I said, we displayed our sense of responsibility, and where in the bipartisan talks that was held between the opposition and the government, the leader of the opposition
Mr. Deputy Speaker, standing order 55-1B. Both speakers previously referred to those talks and letters. This is now the third speaker referring to the same bipartisan talks and the same letter. 55-1B, tedious repetition.
Again, overruled, but member, I would like you to tie it in quickly. Tie in your point. Tie in your point.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I'm simply responding because my colleague Pointe-a-Pierre did not address this issue in responding to the Attorney General as it relates to our responsibility as an opposition. And besides the bipartisan talks, Mr. Deputy Speaker, from an opposition's point of view, on the 19th of March, the opposition, through our party, officially released COVID-19 guidelines, and also, Mr. Deputy Speaker,
I rise on standing order, two standing orders, 48-1 and 55-1B. This is genuinely the third time that the same point has been read in relation to the leader of the opposition's letter, Mr. Deputy Speaker.
Again, member, this evening, as we have clearly identified, we have another bill in order to deal with, and the House have taken the decision that we would like to do it separate. So again, member, tie it in quickly and move on. All right, tie it in quickly, please.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Mr. Deputy Speaker, in addition to our official position, we have demonstrated a sense of responsibility through an initiative, an online initiative on the part of assistant students preparing for the secondary entrance assessment
Deputy
examination.
Speaker, standing order 48-1 and 55-1B. Please.
Okay, member, again, the relevance on that particular aspect, I really do not see it fitting into the bill that we have before us. So could you move to the next point, please?
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. And Mr. Deputy Speaker, in the piloting of this particular piece of legislation, Mr. Deputy Speaker, the Minister of Finance indicated that the focus of this government was to give citizens jobs, to keep them alive, and to preserve jobs. And he indicated that they would have set aside, based on the notes that I took, initially approximately $360 million for a salary relief grant, and he indicated that they would have done their research, and based on their research, that the food and beverage, the tourism, the hospitality sectors, and so on, would have been impacted upon, and the salary relief grant would be in the sum of $1,500.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, Standing Order 55-1B. This has been traversed by every single opposition member today.
Again, honorable member, please, tie in the point quickly, and otherwise you'll have to move on.
Speaker, I have just gotten into my first line of dealing with the salary relief grant. And this is something that was...
Mission to tie it in as we go along. Proceed.
I understand that there is some kind of haste on the part of the government to truncate this debate, Mr. Deputy Speaker. And at the end of the day, we have our responsibility to ask the Minister of Finance the importance of how this $360 million plus an additional $40 million, how it will be operationalized for the benefit of the over 80,000
Mr. Deputy Speaker, Standing Order 55-1B. That has been said over and over and over and over.
Honorable member, move on to your next point, please.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, the National Insurance Board has been asked to administrate the disbursement of this $400 million, Mr. Deputy Speaker. And Mr. Deputy Speaker, yesterday, outside of many offices of the National Insurance Board, there were long lines. There were persons who were confused based on the announcements that was made in the press conference of the government of Trinidad and Tobago, to the point that in one of today's newspaper's headlines, it read, "Confusion, tears outside NIB Social Development Offices as jobless citizens seek relief."
I stand on the point of relevance. Where is this going in terms of the measures in the bill?
Madam Speaker, I am simply asking in terms of the operationalization and the disbursement of the $400 million.
I've clarified. This has been discussed by the two members who preceded you in a different manner, so that I ask you to go on to another point.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, another issue that has been of concern to the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago in relation to this COVID-19 crisis, and probably in his wind-up based on the fact that $10.5+ billion will be spent by the government of Trinidad and Tobago. And in this very said place, the issue of pandemic leave has encountered not only the
Madam
minds...
Speaker, Standing Order 48-1 and 55(1)(b.
The objection is sustained. Please move on to another point. And just, I remind members with respect to the announcements, and I think it has come up in this debate about efficiencies. I remind members of that. The standing orders are going to be strictly applied. So member for Couva South, please deal with a point that has not been ventilated here already.
Madam Speaker, from the point of view of the expenditure that is being sought here this evening, it is $10+ billion. COVID-19 is important from a hygienic point of view. And Madam Speaker, in the very budget presentation of the Minister of Finance as it relates to 2020, the Minister of Finance spoke about a deficit shortfall of approximately $3.5 billion based on the...
I stand on Standard Order 48.1. I'm going to give you one more opportunity to bring this presentation with respect to what is before us. If not, I will have to invoke other powers that I have.
Madam Speaker, I will not want to detain this House, but what is happening here, Madam Speaker, it is a travesty of our democracy in the context of what is supposed to be discussed on behalf
Speaker,
of the people
Standing Order
of Trinidad and
48.6.
Member for Urupuch, member for Couva South. That is a reflection on the chair. Okay? Next. Member for Tabakit.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I assure you that I'm not going to be long, but there are a couple of points I want to make. Madam Speaker, throughout the last couple of days, we have been hearing the statement, we are in this all together. And I agree we are in this all together. And I want to say that together we can also weather this. But we will weather it if we put the value of national unity above everything else. I think that my colleagues on the government side were surprised to see and hear the opposition speaking in support of the generality of the measures. And we are being very sincere in terms of how we are supporting these measures. And I think it surprised our colleagues on the other side because perhaps they didn't get the opportunity to exploit the narrative that they have tried to create of being unpatriotic and what have you. But Madam Speaker, this opposition will not stand in the way of measures that are intended to ensure that children are fed in this country, they are nourished, that families can withstand the economic challenges and financial challenges that now face them. We are not going to stand in the way of measures to ensure that people are not put on the pavements by their landlords. But Madam Speaker, having said that, we also know that these resources that are being asked for here today from the Heritage and Stabilisation Fund are for the short term. And in a sense, the Minister indicated that is about a 3 to 4 month planning scenario, in which, in the short term, 277 million will be given in VAT refunds, 110 million in tax relief, 400 million in salary support and so on, relief grant, and 300 million to the Social Development Ministry, which gives you one...
Madam Speaker, it pains me. Standing Order 55(1)(b. Every speaker has said that.
Member for Tabakit. Member for Tabakit. I'll give you a little leeway to see where this discussion is going. Please continue.
Yes, ma'am, I'm saying that this is going to be a short term, but in the view of the world, that this matter is not going to end overnight. And with so many businesses closing now, it's going to take a longer time to get back on the road. And I'm just asking the Honourable Minister to consider in his wrap-up, or consider somewhere along the line, whether there is a medium-term plan and a long-term plan to continue to take the people over this hump that is growing. Madam Speaker, we are all in this together. And I want to make a very bold suggestion here today, that what we require is not just the drawdown on the Heritage and Stabilization Fund. The minister clearly indicated the conditions under which drawdowns can take place. But we need to go more than that. We need to go more than that. We need to have an economic stabilization and recovery plan. And I want to suggest that if we are really interested in bipartisan politics at a time when this country is in need of unity and national unity, that the government consider setting up a bipartisan committee of the House and incorporating into its stakeholders so that we can come up with such a plan. And I go even further to say that that committee be co-chaired by the leader of the opposition and that we really get to the point.
Standing Order 48.1, please.
Member for Tabakit, I uphold the objection.
What I'm saying is that we need to think outside of the box and we need to move beyond. Sure.
Objection. So please move on to something that relates to the bill as it stands.
Sorry, ma'am. Madam, the other point I want to ask is that the minister raised it about some of the relief that is being brought by, for example, the banking sector, where they said they are giving deferrals of the loans. I'd like the minister to clarify whether in his negotiations with the banks that the deferral really refers to a true deferral, or that people at the end of this 3 months would not at the end of their loan be recapitalized and have to also pay the interest that was accumulating in these 3 months. That is a very important point I want to make. And also just to remind the minister that for the $2.6 billion that's made available because of the repo rate, that people must borrow and they have to pay it back. So that, Madam Speaker, these are the points I wanted clarification from the minister, because I think it's important in the context of people understanding what kind of relief is really being brought and what they're responsible for. Those are the points I wanted to make.
Minister of Finance.
Madam Speaker, some of the points made by members opposite simply don't make any sense. And the sad part about it all is that members opposite have been members of this House for a very long time. They know how our system works. The member for Caroni East, the member for Tabakit, the member for Caroni Central in particular, they understand how our governmental system works. Let me deal first with a comment made by the member for Kuva South, who does know better. The government can only spend according to the law, according to the Audit and Exchequer Act, what has been appropriated by Parliament. That is trite, Madam Speaker. The government cannot spend more than what has been appropriated by Parliament. We have no authority to do that. If we were to spend more, not only would we be breaking the law, we would have to come to Parliament and do another budget, do a supplementation of appropriation. So this theory that has been thrown out here, that the government is going to spend an additional $10 billion, is nonsense, Madam Speaker. We can only spend what has been appropriated for fiscal 2020. I need to debunk this nonsense coming from the other side, that we're going to just dip into the Heritage Fund and spend $10 billion. Lablash, I think is the colloquial word. Just wild. We can't do that. This is a country that is ruled by law. There's a constitution. There are a number of laws that would prevent a government from just spending money wild. We can, this side, will abide by the law. So this government is only empowered to spend what has been appropriated in the budget of fiscal 2020 passed in this Honorable House in October of 2019. So all of that nonsense, please stop it. Secondly, Madam Speaker, the members opposite very well know what they're saying is incorrect. I made the point that in terms of support measures, we have an additional $2.5 billion at this time, estimated, assuming that we'll be out of this crisis within 3 months. We estimate that we have to spend an additional $2.5 billion helping people of this country to live, to stay alive. But, Madam Speaker, every one of them knows that when you have a precipitous fall in the price of oil and gas, when you have a slowdown or a shutdown, as we have now, the effect on revenue is catastrophic. 10 days ago, I made the point that our first estimate, based at that time on an oil price of $40, at that time, the world is changing so fast every single day. On the 15th of March, I had a press conference and I made the point that our calculations at that time were that oil would be at $40 and that the loss of revenue from oil and gas at that time was $3.5 billion. Since then, when you take into account business levy and green fund lost, because we get a lot of green fund money and business levy revenue from the oil companies. So when you add in the business levy that will be lost, the green fund that will be lost, you go to $4.5 billion. That is 2 weeks ago, 10 days ago. Exactly. Today, oil is 24, gas is 160. So you have another $2 billion to add in. That takes you to 6.5, lost from the original appropriation. And then you have the fallout that must come from the decline in business activity, from the health and safety measures that we as a government have to take to save lives. We are in a situation here where we have to take measures to save people's lives. And the consequence of ordering the closure of certain establishments where people congregate. I know their members opposite are intelligent and educated. We had to deal with the places where people congregate. Because if this virus starts to spread in the community, then all the estimates we make in here is joke. The estimates of $3.5 billion or $4.5 billion lost in revenue. All that is joke. From the time the virus spreads in the community, our health services will be overwhelmed. Our health service workers will be overwhelmed. Our economy will be overwhelmed. Look around the world, Madam Speaker. Look around the world. Look at what's going on in Italy. I saw a fantastic statistic yesterday. Italy in particular. Thousands of people dying. Thousands. Germany has 40,000 cases of this virus. 2,000 deaths. And you're seeing people, this thing is no respect of age, 25-year-old, 35-year-old dying of this thing. Healthy people dying of this thing. So we, at the government level, have had to close down certain establishments. You know what the consequence of that is? You all are all educated, intelligent people. You know, once we close business establishments down, we get less revenue, less tax revenue, less value-added tax, less PAY, and so on. So at this point in time, Madam Speaker, we estimate that we could lose as much as $7 billion in revenue in fiscal 2020. But what our plan is, because we are planning for the future. We are not planning only for the present. The $2.5 billion in support, salary relief, social services, trade payables, accelerated VAT and refund payments, that $2.5 billion. And that is outside of the $3 billion in VAT bonds, by the way. That's outside of that. That $2.5 billion is in cash. That $2.5 billion is in addition to the loss of $7 billion in revenue. Takes you to $9.5 billion, Madam Speaker, just to maintain our original budget. We are planning for the future. We have to keep this country alive, not just the people, the country alive. So we have decided as a government, we are going to maintain our original expenditure plan. And let me tell you something else. Every month, Madam Speaker, the government has to find $4 billion for mandatory payments. Just to pay public servant salaries,
salaries of workers in the state enterprises like the RHAs. People don't understand these things, you know. The government pays for all the health sector, billions of dollars every single month. When you add up public servant salaries and you add up RHA workers, it comes to $1.8 billion, Madam Speaker. Add to that pension, $400 million a month. Add to that government pension. Add to that debt servicing. Because if you don't pay your debt and your creditors, all the international and local bankers call in all your loans, economy crash. So we have to service our debt, make sure we don't default on loans. We have to pay salaries and wages to public servants and state enterprise workers. We have to pay disability grant, public assistance, all the social welfare payments, Madam Speaker. We have to give WASA $200 million a month, otherwise WASA will collapse. All of these things add up to $4 billion a month. We have to spend $48 billion a year to just barely survive in this country. $48 billion a year. And then on top of that, you have the development program. You have to continue with your construction program. Construction is an employer of thousands of people in this country. So what we have decided as a government, we are planning for the future. We have decided in this crisis, we must keep the economy going. So we are going to attempt to manage to meet our original expenditure target. We don't have any lavish, conspicuous expenditure, conspicuous consumption in this government. We're dealing with basics, with necessities, so that when someone asks, what the money going to be used for? I just don't understand the question. The money is used to make up the shortfall in revenue caused by this global crisis. That's what it's for. So if we appropriate for $53 billion, and we already had a deficit of 5, so we had to borrow 5 to make up that, and that was primarily the capital program, which is $5 billion, and we lose 7, and you want to maintain people in jobs, you want to make sure everybody gets their salary at the end of the month, at least in the public sector, you have to find the money. So that is why we have changed this Heritage and Stabilization Act withdrawal system, so that in a crisis like this, at least we can keep our head above water. And all the money goes into the consolidated fund. And everybody in this parliament can see how it is spent. It is not a hole. It is going into the consolidated fund to pay old age pension. What do you think the money is for? The money is not to play the fool with. And I don't understand this consistent, ridiculous position from members opposite what the money is going to be used for. The money is used for the service of Trinidad and Tobago, for mandatory payments, for salaries and wages, for pensions. What do you think the money is going to be used for? For pharmaceuticals, for hospitals, to pay nurses, to pay doctors. That's what it's for. To buy ventilators and respirators. These questions coming from members opposite are absurd. So having said all of that, Madam Speaker, having said all of that, I want to repeat that the government can only spend what has been appropriated. And all of us come here and we sit down here for 5 days. And every one of them asking you every question about every single line item. What is that for? What is that for? Goods and services, personal expenditure, vacancies. What is that for? And we sit down here for 5 days, 8 hours a day, and answer every single question they ask. Thousands and thousands of line items in the budgetary estimates. That's what the money is for. So stop asking what it's for. It is to keep the country alive and to keep the people of Trinidad and Tobago alive. I beg to move.
Honorable members, the question is that a bill entitled An Act to Amend the Heritage and Stabilization Fund Act, Chapter 7009, the Government Saving Bonds Act, Chapter 7141, and the Value Added Tax Act, Chapter 7506, be now read a second time. All in favor say aye. Aye. Any against? The The ayes have it.
An act to amend the Heritage and Stabilisation Fund Act, Chapter 7009, the Government Savings Bonds Act, Chapter 7141, and the Value Added Tax Act, Chapter 7506.
The Minister of Finance.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I beg to move an act to amend, sorry, Madam Speaker. In accordance with Standing Order 681, I beg to move that Miscellaneous Provisions, Heritage and Stabilisation Fund, Government Savings Bonds and Value Added Tax Bill 2020 be committed to a committee of the whole.
The question is that the Miscellaneous Provisions, Heritage and Stabilisation Fund, Government Saving Bonds, and Value Added Tax Bill 2020 be committed to the Committee of the Whole. All in favor say aye. Aye. Any against? The ayes have it. The House will now go into the Committee of the Whole to consider the bill clause by clause. Take these four clauses, 1 to 4? Yep.
I would deeply appreciate that, Madam.
Just want to ask a question to the Minister of Finance, and maybe on clause 2.
On clause 2
50,
only?
Yeah.
Yeah. Member for Caroni East, you wish to ask on which clause?
Yeah, same clause 2. I don't know if my colleague would be asking the same question.
That's fine. We'll give you an opportunity because none of us are clairvoyant. So we'll go for 1, then we'll do 2, and then we'll do 3 and 4 together.
Clause 1.
The question is that clause 1 stand part of the bill. The question is that clause 1 now stand part of the bill. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those against say no. I think the ayes have it. Clause 1 now stands part of the bill.
Clause 2.
The question is that clause 2 stand part of the bill. Member for Point of Peer.
Chair, Minister of Finance, clause 2, 3, the 60-day period of reporting to the House, if some consideration can be given to shorten that, we'll be grateful. That's it. Only point.
We did it for a reason. We discussed this at length. And we considered the fact that in the event of a crisis, such as we have now, sittings of Parliament might be limited. So it doesn't make practical common sense to put a short period. And the people may not be here, and the people to prepare the report, the public servants. Right now I have a whole set of public servants working from home. They're not coming to work because they're scared. So that we thought we would put 60 days in. It's a reasonable period, and it takes account of if you had an earthquake, for example, which is this thing contemplates, where are you going to find the people to hustle to do a report in 30 days? So we thought that 60 days makes eminent sense, and we'd like to leave it so. And it's in the context of a disaster, okay?
Caroni East.
That my colleague asked it.
Okay. So the question is that clause 2 now stand part of the bill. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those against say no. I think the ayes have it. Clause 2 now stands part of the bill.
Clauses 3 and 4.
The question is that clauses 3 and 4 stand part of the bill. The question is that clauses 3 and 4 now stand part of the bill. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those like.
It becomes a part of clause 4?
Yes, but
Yeah.
I've already put the question.
No, just
Yes.
I was a little confused on whether that formed part of question.
Yes.
Could the
is
minister
clause
just give a little elucidation on
But-
47A,
but-
A, signed agreements? Minister, this is a little vague. What?
But just one moment. I've already put the question that it now stands part of the bill. So that, I can't see at this stage how I'm going back to allow discussion on the clause. Okay? I'm so sorry,
Rather than-
member. I'm so sorry, member for Caroni East. Okay? I'm so sorry. These are unusual times, and we have to behave in accordance with the time. So the question is that clause These 3 and 4 now stand part of the bill. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those against say no. I think the ayes have it. Clauses 3 and 4 now stand part of the bill. Honorable members, the question is that the bill be now reported to the House. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those against say no. I think the ayes have it. This committee meeting is now adjourned. The House will resume. Minister of Finance.
Madam Speaker, now having kept my procedure to myself for not allowing others to take it, I think I have the correct procedure. I wish to report that the miscellaneous...
May I say, I am now beginning to worry.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I wish to report that the Miscellaneous Provisions, Heritage and Stabilisation Fund, Government Savings Bond and Value-Added Tax Bill 2020 was considered in Committee of the Whole and approved without amendments. I now beg to move that the House agree with this report from the committee.
Honourable members, the question is that this House agree with the committee's report on the Miscellaneous Provisions, Heritage and Stabilisation Fund, Government Savings Bonds, and Value-Added Tax Bill 2020. All in favour say aye. Aye. Any against? The ayes have it. Minister of Finance.
Madam Speaker, I beg to move that a bill entitled An Act to Amend the Heritage and Stabilisation Fund Act, Chapter 7009, the Government Savings Bond Act, Chapter 7141, and the Value Added Tax Act, Chapter 7506, be forthwith read a third time and passed.
Honourable members, the question is that a bill entitled An Act to Amend the Heritage and Stabilisation Fund Act, Chapter 7009, the Government Savings Bonds Act, Chapter 7141, and the Value Added Tax Act, Chapter 7506, be forthwith read a third time and passed. All in favour say aye. Aye. Any against? I think the ayes have it.
A bill entitled An Act to Amend the Heritage and Stabilisation Fund Act, Chapter 7009, the Government Savings Bonds Act, Chapter 7141, and the Value Added Tax Act, Chapter 7506. Motions.
The Minister of Finance.
I beg to move the following motion standing in my name. Whereas it is provided by Section 3.1 of the Development Loans Act that the government is authorized for the purpose of financing general development in Trinidad and Tobago, A. B. Repayment of borrowings effected for such general development, or C. Repayment of borrowings effected for general development. 1. By a statutory authority within the meaning of the Statutory Authorities Act. 2. By an enterprise that is controlled by or in behalf of the state. Or 3. By the University of the West Indies to borrow from time to time money externally or internally in a sum or sums not exceeding in the aggregate $45,000 million in the currency of Trinidad and Tobago. And whereas it is also provided in the said Section 3.1 that thereafter such sum in such currency may from time to time be specified by resolution passed by the Senate and the House of Representatives. And whereas it is necessary for the government to borrow further sums of money for the purposes stated in the said section, be it resolved that for the purposes stated in the said section, the government is hereby authorized to borrow money externally or internally in a further sum or in further sums not exceeding in the aggregate $10,000 million in the currency of Trinidad and Tobago. Madam Speaker, this motion has been on the order paper for quite a while. We did not avail ourselves of the motion because we were monitoring the fiscal outturn for the first 3 to 4 months of the year. And as I said, oil prices had kept pace with budgeted figures, and therefore we were on target. Commodity prices began to deteriorate in January, and in fact, it's a little known fact that the price of oil was $63 in January, 63, and dropped now to 23. So the price of oil has dropped 65% in the last 2 months. The only way to deal with a precipitous drop in revenue, which is the obvious result from a drop in commodity prices, is to borrow. At this point in time, the government must consider all sources of funding available to it to keep this country afloat. So we have a range of funding sources. We have the possibility to borrow from international financial institutions, and that comes under a different act. That is the External Loans Act, and the ceiling there is quite significant at this point in time. The ceiling under the External Loans Act, based on previous debates, is at this time $10.4 billion. We can also borrow guarantee of loans companies. In other words, we can authorize state enterprises to borrow for development. And the ceiling, the headroom on external loans, which is foreign loans, is $10.4 billion. And the headroom on guarantee of loans companies is $21 billion. So we don't need to adjust those limits at all. So let's say we were borrowing for state enterprise, MTS for example, as we are doing, to complete schools. We have available to us $21 billion in headroom, $21 billion in headroom, which is based on previous motions and debates in this House. So we can borrow up to a further $21 billion for state enterprise development without coming back to this House. We can borrow $10.4 billion externally from IDB, World Bank, Andean Development Bank, foreign institutions like Bank of America, Credit Suisse, JP Morgan, etc., to the amount of $10.4 billion. So we have substantial headroom already approved by this Parliament, external loans and companies. Where we don't have headroom is in the Development Loans Act, and that's general borrowing by the government. And that, the headroom now, is just $400 million. That's where we've reached in terms of the Development Loans Act. The headroom, the availability, we can only borrow $400 million at this time if we're borrowing for general development under the Development Loans Act, direct government borrowing. This is quite different to borrowing overseas or allowing state enterprises to borrow with a government guarantee. In the situation we find ourselves in, that's too close for comfort, much too close for comfort. Because while members opposite may want to throw stones at us about taking out all this money from the Heritage Fund, we must have options as a country and a government. We must have a range of options available to us to deal with this crisis. We have funding, some funding is available from the Andean Bank. The World Bank has offered some funding as well. The IMF funding is really not for us, that's for poor countries, and it comes with conditionalities. And IDB has decided that they would redirect resources to the health sector. So that's confined within the health sector. But whatever is there, we will avail ourselves of it. If we can get money from the World Bank, from the IDB, and from the Andean Bank, we will avail ourselves of it. But really, you want to mobilize resources in the domestic sector. You want to mobilize as much borrowing as you can in TT dollars, because once you borrow in foreign dollars, you face exchange rate risk. So that it doesn't make sense for this government, for any government, to have only $400 million left available in terms of general borrowing. So this is why we have come today, and we are seeking to raise the limit by a further $10 billion, and this will be for the foreseeable future. And in plugging the deficit that I spoke about earlier, which is now about $10 billion when you add everything together, we will avail ourselves of different avenues. We're not going to go and take $10 billion out of the Heritage Fund. We're not going to go on the foreign market and borrow $10 10 billion. We're not going to go local and borrow 10 billion. We will avail ourselves of all available sources of funds in the best interest of the country at the best rate and all that sort of thing. So all we are doing here is we are now putting this together as part of a package of measures to help to keep this country afloat and to keep people alive. I beg to move.
Honorable members, I shall now propose the question for debate. Be it resolved that for the purposes stated in the said section, the government is hereby authorized to borrow money externally or internally in a further sum or in further sums not exceeding in the aggregate $10,000 million in the currency of Trinidad and Tobago. Member for Caroni East.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I know in the interest of us not being delayed too long in this House, and we standing the risk of getting the infection, God forbid, we are very happy with the way that we were placed out today. So we know that the minister came here with the one that preceded this on the HSF, but he has come now on this motion. This motion really seeks to move the borrowing limit on the development loan under the Development Act from 45 to 55. So that's 10 billion. Minister, you had come here early on in, I think it was 2015, just after the election, and you had asked us to move the ceiling from 30 to 45 billion. I think it might be incumbent upon you to give, well, you said you only have a 400 million headroom on this. So you have come close to maximizing your 45 billion. So perhaps it might be appropriate at some time for you to, in the interest of what people are asking for in the country, you have $45 billion under the development loan because you move it from 30 to 45, 15 billion during your term. What have you done with it? Give us an appreciation of what development you have achieved with that $15 billion. So I think from that perspective, you will comfort the population as Minister of Finance to say, well, look, I asked for 15 billion more in December 2015. I have maxed it out, but I can tell you this is how we were able to spend that money on development plans. But now you're asking for another 10. I know you wanted to cut short your presentation on this, and I will do so myself, is you should give, just as you did on the heritage and stabilization, you gave a breakdown of how you're going to spend your $2.5 billion. At some time, when we're in not this type of situation, you will say what you really want to do with the other 10 billion. In essence, now, based on the HSF and this, you're really asking to borrow $20 billion, because 1.5 from the HSF US, that's 10 billion, and 10 billion from this. So people are asking, Honorable Minister, well, what you're doing with this $20 billion that you want to borrow? And you said it's going to be a mix. You're not going to utilize all from the HSF, and you're going to have some, and you still have some headway under the External Loans Act, as you mentioned. I think you have a 30 billion ceiling now, because that was passed, and I think the central bank had an economic bulletin on March 2016. And under the External Loans Act, Chapter 7105, it had been moved from 15 billion to 30 billion. So I think you probably know with your headroom how much you said you have about 10 billion somewhere there. And the Guarantee of Loans Act, the Companies Act, you said you also have a headroom, but that was increased from 25 billion to 45 billion. So during this time, you had the External Loans Act moving from 15 to 30, that's 15 billion there, and from 25 to 45 with the Guarantee of Loans Companies Act, that's another 20 plus 35. So from that, Honorable Minister, a Minister of Finance, it would be, I think, important for you to give an account to the country, because people are asking, well, why is it that the government is borrowing so much money all the time? Are we not seeing any developmental processes for these? So I think I've completed my point on that. The one on the, for statutory authority and state enterprises, you want to borrow for repayment of some of these. I think it says here, repayment of borrowings effected for such general development, or repayment of borrowings effected for general development by a statutory authority and state enterprise, and for University of the West Indies. So, from my understanding, we have 49 state enterprises, and we all know what they are. And we have, I think, 49 state enterprises, and they are, now is not the time to read out all of these 49 state enterprises, and 62 statutory authorities. So I think the country needs to know where we are with borrowing for these statutory authorities and state enterprises. When we look at the yellow books at the beginning of the fiscal year, when we do the assessment and ask the questions and so on, we get a little inkling of where we are with loans and how much we have made with capital repayment. Well, I think as a responsible government, if you consider yourself to be a responsible Minister of Finance, and it will be good for us to have a breakdown of the various statutory authorities and the state enterprises in terms of where we are with the loans. There is just one little area again that I want to speak about. Minister, you have borrowed already. Well, I think everybody knows that the borrowing is $122 billion at the moment. And you have moved the debt to GDP from 49% to about, I don't know whether it's 63% or 65%. And the IMF is saying that 70% is a real critical level. Now, I have with me a detailed breakdown of what you have borrowed for your 4.5 years of total loans of $26.52 billion. I will not go into the details. You know what are the details of that. And if we add the HSF from what was there previously, we come to $30 billion, Honorable Minister. So $30 billion already borrowed for the 4.5 years. And I think from a responsible opposition perspective, we need for you to tell us, well, people are saying, well, where did you spend this money? And if you look at your total budgetary expenditure for the 4.5 and projected to 5 years, you would be spending something close to $277 billion, whereas in our 5 years, we spent $297 billion. So we spend $20 billion more. If you take 5 year to 5 year, 297 versus 277. But here you have borrowed already $30 billion, and you want to borrow another $20 billion. So that's $50 billion plus your 277. Where is that taking us? And people are asking, what really have you done? Now, one last area, the public debt issue. I have a little comparison of 2018, 19, and 20 on interests and principals. And the grand total for 2018 for total repayment of loans for interest and principal and sinking fund was $9.2 billion. 2019, the revised estimate was 8.0 billion, and in 2020 estimate 8.6 billion. So, Honorable Minister, we are finding ourselves borrowing more and more, and the amount of money we're having to pay from the total revenue, if you said you're getting $47 billion for revenue for the year, and that is going to be shortened, and we have to pay 8.6 billion, which works out to about close to 1/5 of that, which is about 20%. And if we have to pay for towards principals and interest, 20% of our revenue. I'm sure you're finding it extremely difficult as a Minister of Finance to have to deal with that. So from our perspective as the opposition, a responsible opposition, we're asking you to look critically. And we expect that you as Minister of Finance will use your intelligence and your networking and what you have gained over the last 4 years as Minister of Finance to look critically at where we are in terms of our borrowings and be very passionate of our decision not to continue excessive borrowing unless it's absolutely necessary. As my colleagues earlier on said, we support you wholeheartedly. From our side, from the general population, the opposition supports you wholeheartedly in your trust to spend the money to pay the people, the unemployed, for the pharmaceuticals, for the ventilators, and to help the indigent, and from the Ministry of Social Development to help the people who are without jobs and who need funding. So we support you with that fully. And therefore, it is our hope that when you come now for approval and, of course, our concurrence to support this Development Loans Act, and where I've pointed out that you, in effect, will be borrowing close to $20 billion when you have already borrowed $30 billion, I think it is important for you to tell the country what you're going to do with it, where we're going. You have explained one part of it, which is about $2.5 billion there, and then you come with a VAT for $6 billion and so on. But that's a separate issue which you have discussed earlier on. So, Honorable Minister of Finance, I think I'm dealing with this from a perspective of time and from a perspective of asking questions which the general public has been asking. And you need to demonstrate to the country how you have really spent this money so that people will not be questioning you as they are questioning now. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you very much.
Minister of Finance.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I thank the member for his contribution. Just let me clarify some issues. A withdrawal from the Heritage Fund is not borrowing. Not borrowing. If you withdraw from the, you add it up. The honorable member, Madam Speaker, was adding up everything, 10 billion from the Heritage Fund, that is borrowing 10. 10 billion extra on the development loan is the next 10, and he got 20. I just want to, there are people listening who might believe you, Honorable Madam Speaker, through you, they might believe him. A withdrawal from the fund is not borrowing. Just let me make that clear, okay? Secondly, we can't spend 20 billion. We can't take 10 billion from the Heritage Fund and borrow 10 billion and spend it. It goes back to my earlier point. The government can only spend what has been appropriated. I don't have the ability under law to spend $20 billion extra in terms of this year's budget. It is impossible. It is illegal. It is unlawful.
It is not impossible. They did it, but it is illegal.
So, Madam Speaker, there are people listening. They must understand what these honorable gentlemen opposite are saying. It's just not correct. I am not coming to the Parliament today to ask for permission to spend $20 billion in addition to what has already been approved by this Parliament for the service of Trinidad and Tobago for fiscal 2020. That is impossible. What we are doing today is increasing the limit, because you don't want to come back into Parliament every month, every week, to increase the limit by 500 million, another 500 million, doesn't make common sense. And the whole point is, Madam Speaker, will you all stop it? The whole point is, Madam Speaker, when we came to the Parliament some time ago to increase the borrowing limits, we increased the external loans limit, the guarantee of loans for companies limit, and the general development limit. As it turns out, it is more economical, it is more cost-effective to borrow using the
Development Loans Act. You get a better rate. For example, if the government goes to market to borrow $1 billion over 3 years, the rate the government will get is 3%. But if alternatively we said, all right, let a state enterprise, let NIDCO borrow $1 billion with a government guarantee, the rate immediately goes to 4%. The interest rate charged, you want to ask a question? Sure.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Thank you, Minister. We have seen here on the financial statements of a number of state enterprises that some borrowings have been an interest of 9.5% and 7.5%, and that will come under the development loan. But I'm a little puzzled for you to say that the interest rate on that will be less than the other, like the World Bank and so on, which is about a little 1 or 2% in addition to LIBOR. So could you explain that?
Those rates of 9% and so on were borrowed by you. Under this government, Madam Speaker, we borrow at 3%, 4%, 5%. But we're carrying a lot of old loans on our books from prior periods, prior governments, where the interest rates were much higher. I am talking about over the last 4 years. Over the last 4 years, that is not under this act. Over the last 4 years, and that makes my point, that when the government does direct borrowing, because the limit we are seeking to increase is the limit for direct borrowing. When the government does direct borrowing, we get a far better interest rate for a sovereign loan than a loan taken out by a state enterprise. And I am talking about a loan taken out by a state enterprise with a government guarantee. And let me go back to the point I was making. If the government borrows money over 3 years, the interest rate is in the vicinity of 3%. If, however, we were to guarantee a loan for a state enterprise, over the same period, the interest rate would automatically rise to 4%. If it is not guaranteed, the interest rate could be any amount. So that under the Development Loans Act, we get the best interest rate, the most cost-effective interest rate, and the best value for the people of Trinidad and Tobago. When we did it before, we increased all of the limits, external, guarantee of loans, and development loans. And what the public servants have done over the last 4 years, my debt management unit, they have chosen to go for the least cost loans, which is the loans taken out through the Development Loans Act. That's why we have a large threshold in the guarantee of loans of $21 billion and a large threshold in the external loans of $10 billion. We could still borrow $10 billion more externally and $21 billion more for companies, but it's at a higher rate. So this is all about value for money and efficiency. This is the best form of borrowing. Yeah, I'm about to end. Yeah, so this is all about borrowing at the best rate. And this is why we see the need. What we perhaps should have done the last time we spoke, and hindsight is the last time we debated this. Hindsight is 20/20 vision. Perhaps we did not need to increase the ceiling on the guarantee of loans for companies by the amount that we did, or even external, and perhaps we needed at that time to raise the development loans ceiling more. I will end with that member, and having said everything I said, let me thank honorable members opposite for supporting both of the matters before the House today. Notwithstanding all the old talk, thank you very much for supporting both of the members before, both of the matters before the House today. The threshold, the headroom left on the development loans is $400 million. The threshold left is $10 billion. Yes. So, and on the guarantee of loans is 21. Okay? Yes. So that, Madam Speaker, this is the best value for the country, and I therefore beg to move.
Honourable members, the question is, be it resolved that for the purposes stated in the said section, the government is hereby authorized to borrow money externally or internally in a further sum or in further sums not exceeded in the aggregate $10,000 million in the currency of Trinidad and Tobago. All in favor say aye. Aye. Any against? The ayes have it. So, Leader of the House, do we have an agreement to entertain one more matter on the understanding of the time for the adjournment?
Yes, ma'am. We'll be ending at 6:30, come what may.
Clerk.
1 minute.
Attorney General.
Madam Speaker, I beg to move the following motion standing in my name. Be it resolved that the Senate amendments to the miscellaneous provisions, age of retirement of judges, interpretation, and Chief Judicial Officers Bill 2019, listed in Appendix 2, be now considered.
Honourable members, the question is that the Senate amendments to the miscellaneous provisions, age of retirement of judges, interpretation, and Chief Judicial Officers Bill 2019, listed in Appendix 2, be now considered. All in favour say aye. Aye. Any against? The ayes have it.
Clause 4, in paragraph A, delete the words the registrar and marshal of the High Court and substitute the words registrar and marshal.
Attorney General.
Speaker, I thank you and honourable members. This is really just to correct the nomenclature in line with the public service nomenclature. It is a very simple amendment. It is intended that we can proclaim this law immediately and therefore ensure the continuity of sitting judges. I beg to move.
Attorney General, if you could just move in accordance with the procedure, please.
Madam Speaker, I beg to move that this House agree with the Senate in amendments to Clause 4 of the miscellaneous provisions, age of retirement of judges, interpretation, and Chief Judicial Officers Bill 2019. Madam Speaker, this is to correct the nomenclature. It is a simple amendment. Passing this today would allow us to preserve the existing capacity of the judiciary, and I beg to move.
Honourable members, the question is that this House agree with the Senate in the amendments to the Clause 4 of the miscellaneous provisions, age of retirement of judges, interpretation, and Chief Judicial Officers Bill 2019. Attorney General.
Beg to move.
Honourable members, the question is that this House agree with the Senate in the amendments to Clause 4 of the miscellaneous provisions, age of retirement of judges, interpretation, and Chief Judicial Officers Bill 2019. All in favour say aye. Aye. Any against? I think the ayes have it. Leader of the House.
Thank you very kindly, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I beg to move that this House do now adjourn to a date to be fixed.
Honourable members, the question is that this House do now adjourn to a date to be fixed. All in favour say aye. Aye. Any against? I think the ayes have it. This House now stands adjourned to a date to be fixed.